Up next is my conversation with Sam Eisenberg, a pitch design expert. It's surprising how much pitching and marketing overlap. At the core, it's about communicating value, vision, and expectations. So, whether you're a startup founder pitching to investors or a marketer working on your homepage copy, you will pick up some powerful storytelling techniques and learn frameworks to strengthen your message. See you on the other side. Enjoy.
I hear the term deck a lot. Like I'm on LinkedIn, man. That's where it's at. So can you walk us through what a deck is and why is it such a crucial part of a startup's journey?
Sure. So we'll take a step back, actually. The first thing is, before a deck, we call it a pitch deck, right? That's the more formal terminology.
All right.
And the core of a pitch deck is a deck or a presentation that aids you in your pitch. Now, in terms of pitching, right, we're thinking, and the core of what I focus on is investor presentations, the ability to pitch investors, the ability to get other people to invest or join into your project or into your company. But pitching is something that's actually very much not just something that relates to investors. We're pitching on a daily basis. Obviously, we think of pitching, we think of sales, but anything that we're doing, whether that's trying to bring on partners, whether that's in a conversation with family members, deciding what activity we're going to do, what we're going to do, pitching is actually a very core part of what we're doing every day as individuals. It's part of your conversation. It's part of, in a sense, also negotiation. And obviously, it's extremely critical to founders who do need to bring on strategic partners and clients, and unfortunately, oftentimes investors as well.
Yeah.
So that is a pitch. Now, a pitch deck has been the preferred format for most investors, and there's various types of decks. Okay, so we have what we call the send-along deck, a deck where you're oftentimes ahead of it's basically built to gauge and to get investor interest. So you're sending a deck that kind of takes your big story, all your blood, sweat, and tears, and everything else you invested into your company, and distills it in a way that a cold audience, an audience that is not familiar with you, can quickly understand it and find it engaging and intriguing enough so that they hopefully invite you for a meeting or a follow-up conversation. So that's a send-along deck. A second type of deck we use is a live presentation deck. So that's oftentimes, an investor will actually want to see your pitch deck, so they understand a lot about who you are, what you've accomplished. But the second reason they're actually having you pitch live is because they want to see that you could sell. There's a core belief that you could build the most amazing product in the world, but if you can't actually sell it, then you're going to have a very, very hard time building a successful company, and we probably won't want to invest in you. So when you're going to this pitch, your company's being measured, but your ability to pitch is very much being measured as well. The investors want to see, hey, can you pitch this opportunity, this business opportunity, this company to me? And the pitch deck that you're using in that conversation looks a lot different. It's much more thinned out, right? You don't want your investors or your audience reading through your whole slides while you're trying to tell the story. You're the one that's telling the story. You're the storyteller. You are the one pitching. And it basically serves as a visual aid to help drive points home, to help them illustrate ideas, to help them see the product or things that you wouldn't be able to do just through the power of speech. Okay.
Okay. Wow. So we have standalone decks and live presentation decks. And you mentioned a couple of misconceptions already, for example, brevity, right? So people would put too much text in them and take away the attention from themselves. Are there any other misconceptions about decks that you see often?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. I think ultimately there's this belief that you build a deck, but you don't build a deck, right? The number one rule of public speaking, and the same would apply to pitching, is know your audience. So what you need to build something that's going to resonate well with your audience. So what people do is they build a deck, and then they use the same deck for every investor. They use it as a send-along. They use it as a live presentation deck. They use it for everything. So the goal is you need to know who your audience is, and that research is so critical to the process. So you build a deck. Maybe you can call that your core deck, but then you need to, modify it and amend it for the different conversations you're going into. So that could be based on the level of understanding the investor has. So if you see that they're, an investor that that has a background in this industry, maybe I need to dive a little bit less into the problem because they'll understand it. If I see their investor that the technical side is very important, even if I'm not going to include a lot of the tech details in the core pitch, I'm going to definitely, have a slide or two ready for them that dives deeper into that. There's going to be, if they ask you in their, hey, I'd love to learn more about this, I have difficulty with ABC, I don't understand how the marketplace model is going to work, how you're going to get the demand, then make sure to answer those questions as well. So a deck, you build a core deck, you build a narrative, you build a story, you build an investment case, but ultimately that deck should and needs to be adjusted based on that conversation you're having and the format you're having it in. Okay. So again, is that a live presentation? Is that a send-along? Are you physically standing there? Are there specific answers that you see or concerns that they had that you need to address? Did you get feedback in previous pitches that your pitch didn't adequately address some key core critical items? And then of course the length of the meeting. So if your meeting is going to be like 30 minutes, which is pretty standard, like don't prepare a 30-minute pitch, right? Yeah. You need to leave time for the conversation, for the human connection, for the questions, for the follow-up. Like we say, limit it to 10, 12 minutes at most, and the investor may ask you to actually do it even quicker.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, deck is just a tool to do the job. And when you hire it, you need to be aware of the context in which it exists. And then that context impacts the structure, the narrative, all of that. There is definitely parallel to any types of communication. You need to know who you talk to and what they want to hear, etc. Right? So it's just common sense. So that's perfect. Okay, so
it's common sense.
Yeah,
but it's also for many people very challenging, because when you're a founder saying, "Hey, put your company into 10 slides or 15 slides," you're like, "Wait, how can I do that?" Like I've been, 4 years ago, I quit my job. I moved into my mom's basement. I lost all my friends. I haven't had a stable relationship. Obviously I'm exaggerating, but people they truly do invest a huge amount into building their company. And it's like, take what you've done and built over the past few years and distill it into just 10 or 15 slides. So by nature, people tend to overshare. They intend to include too many details without thinking about what does my audience actually need to hear right now? Because this is not the end of the conversation. This is the beginning of the conversation. And as that conversation progresses, you're going to have additional conversations to touch on specific points and topics and items that we need to get deeper into. Okay. The second piece is where founders, especially founders of more tech products or things that relate to the life sciences, is they get very, very, very excited about the tech. Whereas the investors and oftentimes not only investors, your audience actually wants to understand what it does, right? I don't actually care necessarily about all the underpinnings right away, what problem it solves, what's the mechanism it uses to get there, and what benefit does that bring to my target audience. So getting very deep into the technical side, using a lot of terminology and jargon, and using what we say, like you have the curse of knowledge. Like a founder lives in this little bubble, and they to them, everyone in their immediate space knows so much about the startup that they're communicating at a level of a much higher level of knowledge and information than the person they're actually going to be pitching. So sometimes you need to get out of that bubble and make sure, just like you said, right? Explain it to a 5-year-old. Make sure that anyone can understand this, because if they can't understand it, they can't begin to have a conversation.
Yeah.
So they need to understand it. It needs to be concise, and it needs to focus on the core points that make this unique and intriguing enough to invite you for a follow-up conversation.
Okay. I love how we're making this. So the whole concept of getting to the point is very, very strong with this one. And I can definitely see how this also happens when we build websites. When you think of a company that serves, let's say, 3 audiences, their product platform has like 10 functionalities, and they do all sorts of resources like academy, on podcasts, webinars, whatever, and you have to put all of this on a website. They almost want all of it to be on the homepage, but that's not how you start the conversation. You start with a generic statement. This is who we are. This is what we do. And then based on their interest, what engages them, you sort of pull in on that thread and let them dive deeper, right? That's the user journey. And I imagine there's journey to the deck as well. Now, I believe that journey is called storytelling. And so if the storytelling is at the heart of a deck and it weaves sort of through all the concept that you're trying to convey, and investors don't just want to see numbers, obviously, what are the key elements of a compelling story in a deck?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and like everything else, it's who are you telling the story to?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think websites are a great example because right, you're always when you're working with a skilled consultant or copywriter, they're not just putting nice copy on a page, right? It's all about understanding how are people landing on your page, what are they solution aware, are they problem aware, and all other different points we're going to ask. And I would say to the same point, you also have landing pages, right? Landing pages are like and funnels. Like, how are people getting to my company? And maybe I don't want to send it to my homepage. Maybe I want to send them through a totally different flow because they got here much differently than someone who just landed on my homepage, generally speaking.
That
Now,
makes sense.
in terms of storytelling, so at least in the, there's a lot of variation. But at the core, there are two things they need to understand. They need to understand what you do, like I said, which is like a prerequisite to telling the story. So like right away on our homepage, some people like to use like clever one-liners. Some people like to use like very disrupting, disrupting website building, whatever they want to write.
And transformative.
Actually, it's maybe good for marketing, but for pitch decks, it's quite ineffective.
It's not good for marketing.
Yeah. Okay. I was giving them some of the benefit of the doubt.
Okay.
They had a good reason for using, these statements. Whereas clarity is going to be key, and that's a prerequisite. So when an investor who's pitched, investors get pitched all day and all night. So when they're looking at hundreds, thousands of pitches, we need to make it easy for them to understand the framework of what we're doing. So on the home slide, we use different formulas, and we give a very simple, easy way for them to understand what your company does, what problem it solves, who the target market is, and what's the mechanism they're doing it by. Right away, they can look and say, okay, before we go into this, before I continue in this presentation, I actually understand who you are and what you do. Then in terms of the story itself, I would say definitely at the early stage when you don't have, a lot of traction or a lot of revenue, when you don't have a lot of customers, you need to very much demonstrate that this is a painful problem. Okay. So someone's looking at it and they're saying, oh, I worked in the HR space for 10 years. And I know that hiring is really cumbersome. It's really not fun to do. But your audience that you're talking to didn't work in the HR space. And, again, know your audience. So if you're an investor or someone who, came out of a top university and worked in consultancies and worked as, investment banker, they may not have experienced anywhere near this issue. It's so far out of the realm of knowledge. So what can I do to help them understand that this is a painful, costly problem in a currency, in a manner that they can understand? So for instance, using that example, instead of just saying, hey, HR, hiring is really painful, what I want to do is actually demonstrate that. So I can show data that demonstrates that this is impacting a large percent of hiring managers, right? 82% of hiring managers find the process difficult. What I could do is use data to show how painful it is. So the hiring process takes 8 to 12 weeks or 12 to 36 weeks. I'm sure it depends on the industry and the problem. And when they can understand that, you can quantify for them, it's easier for them to grasp. But then, of course, the important piece is the currency. What is this costing them? So the most natural currency is money. What is this costing a company or an individual or whoever your target market is in money? That's the best currency. But if you can't use money, right? Let's say it's a life-saving device. You can also talk about other things that are quite easy to quantify, right? Number of deaths it's causing, number of hours saved. It's an efficiency tool. So you can use a lot of different items, but the idea is that the problem needs to be extremely painful. If they can understand why this is an extremely painful problem, and there's this saying, I don't know who it originates from, but like fall in love with the problem. Ultimately, they want to see that this is a real problem that we are tackling together, and that we need to, that we want to solve. So we're basically bringing you onto our team to help us together fight this problem and solve this problem. Okay.
Yeah.
And the reason that's so critical is that we often see the inverse, where people are so focused on their solution, and especially at the early stage, anyone who's been in the startup scene knows your solution often evolves. Sometimes companies take huge pivots, but for the most part, you should be dealing with the same problem. Okay, there are exceptions to that too. So the first piece is the problem. You want to get that piece right. And then the other really, really critical piece at the early stage is going to be the team. And this is one where a lot of startup founders are challenged. Because, yes, if you came out of you formerly founded a unicorn, you'll have a very easy time pitching, even without a lot of other key components. So you come out and say, look, I already sold a company or exited a company for $150 million. Great. If you did it once, you could probably do it again, or you have a higher likelihood of doing it again. So that makes it easy. Most startup founders are first-time founders, and they don't have that advantage. So the team is also going to be very critical, because at the end of the day, the investors are investing in the founding team. And sometimes that's even explicit, like Y Combinator, like the most well-known accelerators. They're quite explicit about that. Like, we are investing in the founders first and foremost.
Oh, wow.
So your team is going to be a very important piece as well. It is challenging, but as many ingredients as you could create to help make that team believable as a winning team is helpful. So let's call it the objective ones will be things like industry relevant experience. Have you worked in this industry? Like, if I today go and create an HR solution, I never worked in HR. Okay, I've hired some people, but it wouldn't be genuine. Like, you don't actually deeply understand the industry. Position relevant experience. If I hired a CTO and he just came out of a coding boot camp and never worked in ran a technical team before, I'd be a little bit nervous about him doing so. Stage relevant experience. People who worked in other startups, early stage startups, understand, kind of all the different pains that go into it, and they understand how that looks, and they understand better what to expect and how to prioritize. They learn from their mistakes or perhaps from their wins. It's helpful to highlight that as well. And then, of course, anything that you could, wins, big splashy logos, you worked at exited companies, relevant awards, like don't show that you won award in 11th grade. Anything that you can show to say like, hey, I've had success, I've had achievements, we want to highlight those as well. And then the last one, which is kind of like, I call it like a bonus, is have you validated the founding team? Okay, a lot of startups fall apart or run into a lot of challenges on the dynamics of the founders. If you can show that you've worked together, hey, we first worked together 10 years or 5 years in another company, then we came out to start this, that always works in your favor. It shows that you know how to work together, that you have a validated relationship. So those are the really critical ones. And then there's going to be I'd say the more subjective ones. At the end of the day, investors, they're investing in it's an investment opportunity, but it's also a long-term relationship. At least it should be. If your investor is just putting in money and disappearing, that's not such a good thing. So what they want to see is that they like you. And, that's part of the process in creating that likability. And that's also part of your pitch. Can you pitch? Can you show the ability to pitch? Can you show, do they show your charisma and all these different items? And while maybe that's almost like unfair, some people naturally have more charisma than others, it's also a fact. People invest in people, and people invest in people that they like and feel a connection to. So there's no real way around that. Okay, so at the core, like your problem, that's the piece where you need to weave into your story very effectively, your team, and then circling back from one of the things I said about your industry relevant experience is people connect to stories. Stories are great, but there's a caveat, and the caveat is the story actually has to be related to your startup, and also relevant to the audience. So, for instance, I heard a pitch recently, and she mentioned something about the founder mentioned something about like her parents fighting when she was kids, and now she's probably in her mid to late 30s. Like, so you're talking about 20 years later. Now she founded a startup. There obviously wasn't a huge connection between the two. Like, something more natural would be like, hey, I worked at checkout at a store for 3 years, and I saw how inefficient this process is and how much time cashiers lose. So I came up with a solution. That would be a lot more. You're closer to the story. But just to create a story for the sense of creating a story is not something I would recommend. Okay.
Okay.
And then in terms of, I'm sorry, if I'm,
no, go ahead.
In terms
I
of
just have so many questions. That's fine.
in terms of relevance to your audience, so that's also an important one. So I did a workshop a few weeks ago with like a pretty prominent bank, and one of the founders pitched me, and he started pitching me, oh, do you know when you select the games, when you're selecting video games? And he was a very bright founder, very good storyteller. And I said, actually, no, because I don't play video games, and I never have. I've never been a gamer. So you're creating this, narrative around me, but I actually don't relate to it at all.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Oh, no.
And he told me he had a similar issue where he actually did a different narrative previously. And again, very bright founder, I believe he's going to be very successful. Just his pitch was way off base. And his second thing he did is when he was pitching VCs, who many times did not have children, and he would start off, "Do you know when your kids?" or something like that, and they're like, "No, we actually don't have children." Right? So it's a matter of like knowing your audience.
No.
And what you could do is, you could use anecdotes or analogies, but there's also, it's like a double-edged sword. If you get it right, it's great. And if you don't, it could fall flat. So I was pitched recently by someone who had a product to help like with animal care. I don't have a pet, but I do have children. And she was able to bring that to that. Like, imagine you are placing your child. Do you want to be with someone trusted, licensed? We want the same for pets, right? And it was very easy for me to relate to that, even though I'm not a pet owner.
Okay. Wow. So, okay, that's so much. Okay, so let's go step by step. So first of all, you start with who you are, what you do. Like, this is the basics. Okay. That's what you say. Probably a home slide.
It's a prerequisite. Yeah.
Prerequisite. Okay. And then you really have to double down on the extremely painful problem. And it seems like it's really good to back it up with some kind of backstory. Like, how did you get there? Like you said, with the checkout, or like some kind of grounded in reality.
Correct.
And it, like you said, money talks, and it does, certainly. So if you have any data to back up the problem actually exists, and it spreads across masses that you could reach with your solution, that's great. But then it all comes down to the team. And I actually have a question around this. So team, there is the saying, there's no I in team. How do you feel about solo founders then?
The same principle would apply. Like, how strong are you as a solo founder? So again, a solo founder doesn't mean you'll remain a solo founder. It means at the current stage you're a solo founder. Okay. So if they're getting the sense of, hey, this is an extremely strong founder, and he or she is just waiting to bring on the correct, the proper technical founder when they find the right fit, sure. That'll be easier to pitch. If it's, hey, this person just couldn't find anyone to work with, maybe I'd be a little bit more nervous. And there are obviously certain accelerators that put emphasis on helping you find your co-founders and your founding team. And YC has a founder matching program. It definitely is more challenging as a solo founder, but by no means is it impossible. There are plenty of solo founders who raise. If you have a very, very weak pedigree and you're not close to the problem, then yeah, you'll have a very, very difficult time raising.
Where I'm coming from with this question is that, from investors' perspective, I imagine if there is a co-founder or a multiple co-founders, it reduces that risk of investment. I feel like, because it's like a risk is spread among a couple of people, a few people, and if one happens to be poisoned apple, they can get rid of him and just rely on the other two. With solo founder, I don't feel like there's an opportunity to do that, and so I feel like the emphasis on the relationship and the track record is almost double when it comes to a solo founder. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, but I don't actually think that's the logic. I don't think the logic is hey, if a co-founder is bad, you can get rid of them. Like, if a co-founder breakup can often break up a company. So yeah, while it's something that's technically possible, while it's something that sometimes happens, they're looking at the whole founding team. The 2 or 3 people who founded the company. I think with solo founder, the issue is, again, it's very, very hard to build something amazing, to build a rocket ship alone. It's much more likely to happen in a team, and you also have people have different strengths. So you're going to have the marketing and salesperson, and you're going to have the technical person, or whatever it's going to be. There are people who investors who won't invest in solo founders, and there are those who will. So again, yeah.
Okay, there's much for everyone then. Yeah, good. Okay, so we have the story in a sort of nice framework way, hopefully presented, and people get it. But even the best story, I feel like even the best story can fall flat if it's not visually engaging. So if you don't mind, I would like to talk a bit about how design plays a role in all of it. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So actually, just sorry, a short sidebar before we dive into the design.
Yeah, sure.
A story also has to be told like a story. Okay, and my partner Jack talks about this a lot, where you have every story, whether you read a book or watch a movies or listen to performances, stories have a build up, right? They reach a peak and then they come down and have a resolution. Pitch decks are actually designed in the same way. And while there are many pitch deck templates that exist, what is most important is that you're using a framework that has been proven to work on some level. So we have, for instance, like we curated a list of like 10 like pitch deck frameworks that we can get behind. So they're recommended by top investors. They've been proven to work, and to us, subjectively they make sense. They have a built-up thing about us, a resolution. So anytime you're building, you don't need to necessarily just stick to that framework 100%, but I would say always start with a framework because they have a lot of logic and a lot of data behind them to show that they actually are working. Okay. Now, in terms of visually, so I'd first say, at least for most vendors, like the first thing I would say is like, make sure your visuals are not getting in the way of your story. Okay. And like that's without going and using a top design or anything like that. When you come across slides that are so text heavy that even if it was handed to me, I wouldn't be able to absorb it. Definitely not if you're pitching it live, like that's really bad. If I'm using charts, but I'm not labeling them correctly, so I didn't label my X and my Y axis, which is something I see quite frequently, that's really bad. If I'm using numbers, but they have zero explanation for how the number got there, that's really bad. If I'm using stock imagery all across my slides and it doesn't feel like there's anything personal here, that's really bad. So there's a few things that founders do over and over and over. Very intelligent founders, very impressive founders that are going to be obstacles to them being able to visually present their story. So again, quickly getting to the distinction, a standalone deck needs to be able to tell its own story without you present. Okay, someone needs to be able to go through your deck and understand everything there. A live presentation deck, you're presenting and your deck is a visual aid. From a design perspective and from a content perspective, those two decks look different. From a content perspective, it's pretty easy. It's, hey, get rid of a lot of the subtext, in the live presentation deck. Keep your headers, keep your big graphs, and then that way, as you're presenting it, it's there, it's present, it's helping bring out your story. That's easier. Design is a little bit more complex. As a general rule, a live presentation deck, we say one idea per slide. You never want to try to put more than one idea into a slide when you're presenting. It's hard for people to grasp more than one thing on each slide. You don't want to use like more than one, max 2 graphs on a slide. So even it's displaying the same idea, if you put 4 graphs on a slide, it's too much. You want to break up paragraphs into bullets when you can. So let's say team biographies is a great example. People like to put like full paragraphs like you're going to see on an academic website or on a website of an event. It's way more effective if they can quickly grab the highlights. It's much more visually appealing and much easier to actually digest information. Okay. And then one more thing that we're going to do is we have a structure that we recommend for decks very strongly, which is your slide has basically, I would say, 3 components. So the first component is going to be what we call the slide reference. So that's like, this is a problem slide. This is a solution slide. This is a product demo. This is a team slide, a competition slide. Okay, whatever it's going to be. That should not take up a lot of design priority. I don't want that to be my headline is problem. Okay, I want you to demonstrate the problem. So that is helpful because people like understanding where they're in the deck, and that's fine. Include that in the bottom, one of the corners without taking up too much space. The headline now is really critical because the headline is basically, it's almost like your TLDR. Like if an investor is quickly looking through your deck, they're sitting, waiting for an appointment, they're between meetings, they're going through your deck quickly. I want them to quickly be able to grasp the story. The headline should tell the story without them needing to see all the details. So the headline could be, X amount of people are dying of cigarette smoking every year. Like that would be your problem slide. And the next solution would be, a solution, a program that helps people quit smoking in 30 days or less, right? And then the next slide would be the product demo. Let's now our solution is the only solution that ABC, and then we can show it, right? Something like that. The headline should be enough to tell your story across your whole deck. The body of the slide is then where you can dive deeper into that, where you can use data and visuals to help demonstrate that and drive the point home and build that effect. Okay, so using like that simple structure for practically all your slides will make it really easy to understand what's going on. You're on a traction slide, instead of just putting a graph that shows growth, which is a great thing, add a label, add a line. We are experiencing 24% month over month growth. I don't need to do math. I can quickly look and say, wow, they're growing really nicely. Those are just some examples of like, we're using clear labels, clear formats, clear frameworks that's going to make it much easier for your audience to understand it, even without putting very, very advanced design in the types of things that, you know, an agency like ourselves would do for you.
Awesome. No, this is great. So standalone deck needs to defend itself without you in the room. And so it's very important that you convey the key messages, and so that any investor can just flick through it, glance at it, and know what's up. And then live presentation is just a supplement. It's like a wingman. It helps you.
Yeah, I think it's a great analogy. Yeah.
Awesome. So, okay, fine. What about an extreme? Okay, now this might be a curveball, but I've been to many presentations, and I know I'm well aware of presentations which have too much text. Oh man, I can't. I just news off. Like, there's no way. However, I also been to presentations which either had just an emoji on a slide or no presentation at all, and they were extremely engaging. So, do you see a presentation for investment being done that way and still win over the investors? Like, just the founder becomes the sole focus, nothing else?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are some people, and founders specifically, who are well known for their storytelling abilities. So for instance, like Adam Neumann, the founder of WeWork, he's known that, you know, he's raised capital like practically in one meeting with very little.
Wow.
There are people like Peter Thiel who say like, oh, you don't need a pitch deck, but that's also understanding that Peter Thiel is at the level that any deal that's coming to him has been filtered and gone through a lot of, you know, level of background where he doesn't need a deck because he knows they're really good. If you're a founder who can prove it, you've proved that you can capture an audience and get people excited with a very light deck, and like, sure, great. You know, the challenge is that you usually have one shot. An investor's not going to hear you listen to you pitch twice if they didn't like the first pitch. So you always want to go in with a full deck of cards, if you will. You always want to go in with the best possible hand. You want to go in with a presentation that's going to back up what you're doing really well. Okay, so that is very important. The second piece is that most people are not that level of storyteller. Okay, so like also you'll see it like TED presentations where the presentations are very, very light, bold storytelling headlines. If you can captivate an audience and use just that, great. But it's not only a matter of you. Sometimes it's a matter of you have a product, like use those visuals. You have data, show them with data. So there are certain places where even then I wouldn't use just an emoji.
So it just needs some kind of self-awareness to know your strengths, weaknesses, and then
I would assume most people are not on that level that they can walk into a room and raise capital, and if they were, they wouldn't be listening to this podcast. Like, it's just practically like, why would I listen to information from someone in the industry when I walked into a room and raised capital, you know, without having to do anything? So that's I think most people should assume they're not that level unless they've somehow validated it on a very, very strong level.
Okay, so if you're not Jordan Belfort, go to Sam for help.
Exactly.
Got it.
Not Sam. There's you know, first let's start off by like pitching your friends and family, having your friends and family pitch you to make sure they actually understand your pitch with your deck, having people outside your circles pitch you to make sure they understand it, spending a lot of time to understand, like, is my narrative strong? Is my story clear? Is my why on each slide, like the main idea on each slide, is it actually coming through, or am I just imagining it? And then at that point, you know, you could consider bringing someone for help. But like, as a founder, you need to be able to tell your story really well yourself, and then someone outside can help you bring it, let's call it, from a 7 to a 9 or an 8 to a 10 or something like that.
I really like your the way I think about your services. So your company is designed for decks, and you help people verify if their decks are good enough to be.
We give design for decks. That's essentially what we do. So we design decks.
Yeah.
We try to make it obvious.
Perfect. Look, this is spot on. And the way I think about this is kind of like messaging testing or user tests in a way. So when we build a website, before we put it out live, we test it with target audience if they understand it. That's it. And I feel like you kind of do the same preliminary check. Is that similar? Like just trust but verify kind of step.
It's a great question. So our initial focus was just on providing the design, bringing out the story they already have, and using visuals to bring that out and make it clearer and more obvious and for their audience, and highlighting the strengths. what we found with time is that even the smartest founders, and we receive founders that are referred to us by very tier one venture capitalists and investors. So they come to us with a very high level of vetting most of the time already. And then we found that even then, sometimes we look at their decks and be like, wow, the story just isn't landing. So it's not the core of what we do, but ultimately before we start on a deck, we always offer, and 90% of founders say yes, to review their content with them to make sure that it's actually clear and act as a sounding board on points where they're not sure that it's clear as well. I wouldn't say that's like the default or what we do, but we don't want to visualize a deck and improve and bring out a message until that message is really strong and from the founder side. So once the content is done, then we dive into the design to help bring it out more visually.
I think this is a sensible approach, and I really love what you're doing with the roasting of decks. That's awesome. And I think this is this kind of mix of strategic and executive approach. Like you give that consultative eye to the deck, like try to analyze it slightly on the content level before you dive in and invest into the most expensive part, which is designing. So sort of to weed out issues early on in the process. I feel that's sensible. Do you find any tools invaluable in the process?
You mean for me or for the founder?
For yourself, like what tools do you find invaluable to help with designing decks?
Yeah, so again, there's a lot of different types of founders, a lot of different deck services. Mm-hmm. Our core is on design. Okay, transparently, we're definitely expensive for definitely the local market in Europe. We serve mostly a U.S. audience, and our clients are very happy, and they're coming in from tier one VCs and all of that. So if someone wants to build a deck, the first piece is get your narrative clear, then get your content dialed in, and then work on your design. Now, in terms of getting, high quality design, if you don't have a budget for a designer, or if you, enjoy designing decks, which is good and fine as well, we have a very design heavy process. We're designing elements from scratch. We're building a design system before we go into it. Obviously, if you have it, great. If not, colors, fonts, guidelines in terms of capitalization, guidelines in terms of periods. So we build that internally before we even start building a deck.
Wow.
And sometimes we build variations to give the founder the choice. If you're doing it for yourself, again, you don't need to do it like we do. I mean, we design in Figma from scratch. You can use a tool that aids you in doing so. So my personal favorite for non-designers is pitch.com. I find it to be a really intuitive tool. You get a pretty high quality output. I find that even though I've used PowerPoint for many years, I still find it easier to use than PowerPoint than pretty much my first go. Mm-hmm. Canva is another great tool. Miro has a pitch deck builder. So you can use a tool that can help you with that if you're not a designer. Now, even within that, again, same rules. Don't crowd out your slide. Use labels excessively so people can understand it. The slide format I mentioned. And another important piece is don't go crazy on colors and on fonts. Max 3 colors, max 3 font sizes, consistency across your deck. Your header should always or almost always be located in the same place, in the same size. It creates a much more visually appealing and experience, and it also creates, you want to, as much as possible, convey a sense of professionalism to your audience. So we have founders that actually are quite successful and probably can raise without us designing their deck, but they say, listen, investors are our key stakeholders. We want to put our best foot forward with them. We're having this as a communications with them. We want to show them the nicest possible deck. So that's the core of what we do from a design side. Mm-hmm. And we actually work with a lot of venture capitalists as well. So when they're raising money from LPs, when they're raising money from their limited partners, the people who invest into their venture funds, and them also, they don't necessarily need this, right? A lot of what they're doing is based on relationships and on prior track record. But for them, this is also, we're speaking to our audience. We need to show them our best, professional best foot forward. That's a lot of what we do. The pitch deck roasting is almost like a secondary service that we offer. It's not our core offer at all. Essentially, we reached a point where myself personally, I've had dozens of, I'll go to a conference, I'll speak, and then all of a sudden I'll get bombarded with people, hey, can you review my deck? And I know they're not a good fit for our core service because A, they're not ready, they're too early in the process. B, they probably won't have the budget for it. C, I'm at capacity, we're small and we only take a certain number of decks. but I still wanted to help them. So at first, I gave people just off the cuff feedback. Then I realized it'd be better for them and better for me if there was a small price assigned to that service. So that way someone paid me. I have a commitment to them. They handed me money. I need to give them a lot more value than what they paid me. And on the same side from them, they were sending me the deck once they actually put a little bit more thought into it. Like, hey, if I have to swipe my credit card before sending it to you, maybe I'll get it a little bit further. And the further they get it, the more value I can give them, right? It's very easy to take someone from a 1 to a 5. It's harder to take them from a 5 to a 7. So the pitch deck roast is exactly that. It's built for like very early stage founders, pre-seed, seed, maybe people who don't even fall into those traditional rounds. We've done sales decks, marketing decks, a few other things, and helping them understand how we can make this deck better from a content perspective. And I'll touch on design as well if their deck has already been designed. But it's not the core of what I'm offering.
It sounds like this very much early touch point product that might turn into a customer later on. Like you're essentially casting a net a bit, and then some of those people might become your client. I didn't
anticipate that, to be very transparent, because there's such a disparity in pricing and also in terms of target audience. So like, it's not like a funnel where you're going from a $300 to a $500 product or something like that. Like our pitch deck reviews are $200. Our pitch deck design starts at like $4,500. So they're very, very, very different. They also have totally different focuses. In practice, it actually has generated, surprisingly to me, a few clients. So I think it's maybe people who maybe want to test the waters with the relationship with us, or people who think their deck is in better shape, then after the review they realize that it's not, and they realize they need more help. But that's not the focus. I don't upsell anyone, market to anyone. Like, it's a service that I can help founders at a stage that I couldn't previously, and help more founders than I could with our core service.
I think testing waters is a really good phrase for it. I find that people in service industry, they are essentially in trust building business, and if you can just like a taste for $200 who you are, what are your values, how you act, and like, can I trust you essentially, then it's a good price to pay if the next product, the actual core product is 20x of price. So I think that's great. I wanted to circle back to designs. You mentioned design systems. I am a huge fan of design systems. We build design systems for every client. And I wonder, so when it comes to websites, clients often come with some kind of brand identity already. They have color scheme, fonts, logos, everything. Do you find that problematic for your decks? Like, let's say there's a founder that comes to you with a brand identity he developed himself on a lab in Costa. Do you try to change it, make it better, or do you just run with it even though the contrast is off, or font is bad, or something like this? How do you approach that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. An important piece to mention is that I'm not a designer, and I don't run the design team either. So my partner, Jack, he's like a world-class designer. Had to design at Gumroad, had to design at Vimeo. He's like, he's kind of a brilliant designer and a great person to work with. Anyways, once we're beyond the phase of fixing up the content, pre-sale, all of that, at that point, Jack takes over the design process. So at this point, I do have quite a good handle. Like, we've been doing this together for 4 years and worked on many, many, thankfully successful raises. So Jack, when I'm doing the conversations beforehand, I always gather as much as I can in terms of how established is their brand. Do they have, like you said, fonts, color schemes, logos, all of that? And it depends on the stage of the company. If a company is raising their Series B, their Series C, they're going to have that. Seed, maybe yes, maybe no. So what Jack will do with them on the call is we'll check two things. First of all, if they have a brand, do they want to stick with it? Sometimes we have a company that says, hey, our brand is geared, towards one audience, but we actually want to use something different for our deck. Okay. And that's part of what we'll tease out is, what are they actually looking for? And they can give us examples of decks they saw, websites they like, things that communicate, and Jack will then take those and build a design system around that. If they are happy with their brand, sure, that's great for us. Like, we're very happy to use their existing fonts and color palettes. And even then we can try different variations. The next thing is that they don't have it. And we've even had a couple companies that didn't have a logo. So they say, oh, should we go ahead and build a logo? And Jack always tells them, no, like, we'll choose a typeface and we'll build a simple text logo for you. Like, it's not something you're going to run with for the rest of your life, but at this stage, your logo is not the make or break for your business.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So he'll just develop something for them. And that's actually what I found interesting is some of the early stage companies that maybe wouldn't have the budget for our service, they'll actually come in and say, listen, we appreciate that we actually get to go through this with Jack and find the colors and the fonts. And we're going to then use that for our website and for other materials. So that's actually for them, how they justify spending it. Even when I discourage them, I'm like, hey, you're really early stage. Maybe you shouldn't be spending $5,000 on your pitch deck. And they're like, no, but we're getting insights from a world-class designer who's going to help us build our bread. So, that's not our service. That's not what we're offering. That's not what we're selling.
Yeah.
But some founders are savvy and picked up that can be a good help to them.
That's awesome. I mean, who is to judge where they see value? If they see value in that, perfect.
A couple of founders have said it to me, and I'm like, wow, that is actually really smart. I never even thought of that.
There you go. Hey, you can't plan for everything. Some things just happen. I want, before we wrap up and go for the final remarks, you said the phrase too early. What's too early to go for your help?
Too early is if you went in ChatGPT and you said, build me a pitch deck for an idea, and it built you a pitch deck, don't hand that to me. Okay. So that's definitely too early. Too early is if you had an idea in your head and one night you went and built a pitch deck and you invested a lot in it, but you didn't actually check it with any audiences. You didn't actually, make sure that it's clear. So the point at which you should bring something to, I mean, again, you could bring it early. And I had one of my first clients for the pitch deck review service. I still don't know where he came in from. So I was a very successful founder. He'd raised already $5 million in investment, and he sent me the deck. And I sent him my honest feedback. I went through it slide by slide and very meticulously, and I gave him my feedback. He's like, wow, that's great. He's like, can I get a follow-up? Sure. And he ended up booking like 4 or 5 follow-ups. So he was using this kind of me as like his pitching partner. He'd already raised capital. So he had something that was working, but he was now in a different stage of the process, and he didn't have a team member that he, wanted to pull off of it. Wow. So he iterated, sent it back to me, iterated, sent back to me. We had like 4, maybe 5 back and forths doing this. So that was fine because he had a narrative that had been proven. He just needed to adjust it for the circumstances. But if you're someone who hasn't brought it to anyone, you can send it to me. I'll give you the feedback, but I would say you're a lot better off getting your deck to a better place before you bring it to me. Even pitching it to 2 or 3 different people, getting their feedback, implementing some level of changes, and then bringing it to me.
Okay, so they need to put some effort.
I recommend it. They don't need to. I'll help them at wherever they are, but they'll get more help if they're in a better place. Yeah. I mean, if they want to pay for 10 reviews back and forth, sure, but it just doesn't sound like a good use of time or resources.
Okay. So finally, I don't want to let you go before we talk about AI. You're a crazy AI user. I know that, and for sure, AI has changed the way decks are created, and whether it's automatic design elements or generating text, or even suggesting layouts. How are you currently using AI in deck creation?
So it's a great question, and it's also a matter of like, how are you explicitly using AI, and how are you like implicitly using AI, right? So at the core, there are many AI deck tools that help you write your content, tools that help you with your design, tools that help you test layouts, tools that review your deck for you. And I've tested, I don't want to say all of them, but I've tested definitely the majority of them. And I've paid for many of them as well, because my belief is like, hey, if I could bring something better to my, to my clients, fantastic. At the core, I haven't yet found a tool that does a really amazing job. So I would say like this, from a content perspective, where I'll use it often is I'll use it to help me find the new headline for a slide. So I'll say, hey, this is the current headline, it's falling flat, context, this is what I want it to say, this is what I want it to include, give me 5 variations. And oftentimes one of those 5 variations, it won't be the final product, but it'll be something that I can then work with and put onto the slide. So it's a very, very helpful way to, do quick exploration into other ideas and see what lands. So that's definitely a way I'm using just GPT, plain old, the free version of the GPT.
I'm in the same camp.
Does a very, 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 very fine job with that. In terms of like the pitch deck builders from scratch, I haven't seen anything good. There are a couple that work more like prompt based. So instead of just you're filling in information, it's building it, it's asking you questions that an investor might want to ask you, like about the problem, this and that, and it's building it. It's still not doing an amazing job. But I would say like if you're someone who is stuck at the first draft, like use something like that to get out the first draft, sure. right? That's not your finished product. You're going to iterate and evolve and develop it. But at least at a basic level, you're not stuck in that first draft. Like the first one's always the hardest to get out, and maybe you'll eventually scrap it totally. But at least if you're using a system that's not just build me a pitch deck for an automatic toothbrush, something like that, you're going to end up with utter garbage.
Yeah.
So using something that's going to prompt you and is actually purpose built for this, you can get something that's helpful to you personally, not something you could bring to investors. The other places are, let's say, design. There's quite a few pitch deck design apps that are AI. Again, none of them are amazing. If you're building other types of decks, not pitch decks, I would say that I found Gamma, that app, to be very helpful. Mm-hmm. So it's an AI tool, very, very intuitive. And you're able to quickly build presentations. Like if I was in high school, again, going back, 15 years, then I probably would use a tool like that quite frequently. It's really, really helpful. Pitch.com has also some AI features to it, of course, as well. Canva, has all sorts of their AI tools built in terms of resizing, in terms of removing backgrounds. Beautiful that AI is a pitch deck tool that's a little bit, it's not part of the new wave of AI tools, but it's a good AI pitch deck builder as well. I still prefer Pitch, but it helps you can relay out a slide a few different ways. So there are a few good options in that regard. And you could also use GPT as in a sense a sounding board. Like, hey, here's a screenshot of my slide. Does this come through clearly? What are questions you might ask? And it can help you have some quick conversations when you don't want to be bothering people every second, but at the end, you definitely want to get it in front of human eyes. And you definitely want to get it in front of uninitiated human eyes. You want to get into someone who doesn't have the same knowledge base like GPT has. Someone who's actually a human encountering your deck in your company for the first time.
Okay. So it looks like AI is great at getting over the writer's block.
It's great at getting over writer's block. It's great at helping you explore different headlines or different ways to phrase things. It's great at helping you with make some of the design lift a little bit easier if you're doing your own design. And it can help you with explore layouts, and it can help you with less impactful presentations that you may need internally at work or otherwise as well. Mm-hmm. So that's where I would say AI is great. And we'll see, right? It's still evolving, it's still growing. If we have this conversation in a week or in a month, that may change.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think in a week or a month, transparently, but I think in a year. I think in a year for sure.
A year definitely. This is for sure. I use AI daily, and I'm definitely in the same boat. I would never put anything AI written out there, not remotely close to the final product, but headlines, hooks, drafts, they just steer you in the right direction, and then you add personality to it and expand on it, etc. And that works brilliant. I don't know, it's just this extra kick that you need to start, and that's awesome. I use that AI for that. Okay, I think that's it. Just to wrap it all up, if you could give one piece of advice to a founder working on their pitch deck, what would it be?
One piece, wow.
Yeah.
This is very challenging for
me. It is, I know.
But have other people pitch you with your deck. That would be it. Make sure other people are understanding it. Uninitiated audiences, not your co-founder or not your mother, someone who has nothing about your company. Bring them your deck. Say, pitch me on every slide. I want to ask them 2 questions. Mm-hmm. What is the main idea that comes across? And is everything on the slide clear?
I think this is the best. Yeah, this is great. It's quick feedback loop. It weeds out the major problems, and then you can go to Sam for fine-tuning, and everybody wins. Perfect. Right. So Sam, where can listener go to learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, I'm not super active online, but we have a website, designfordecks.com. If someone's interested in a pitch deck review, reach out there. If you have a quick question, I'm not going to go into these deep conversations, but I'm very happy to answer a one-off question. Send it to team@designfordecks.com.
Awesome.
Happy to help. If helping a founder takes 2 minutes of my time, I'm very, very, very happy to do so. And then I also run a fundraising consultancy that would be raisedb.com. Those are great ways to find me. I'm on LinkedIn too, and any way you'd like.
Perfect. Perfect. No, that's probably plenty to use. Thank you, Sam, for sharing your expertise and practical insights. I really, really appreciate those. That was awesome, and I can't believe how many applications we can, how many practices for creating decks we can use in other ways of communications. That's absolutely awesome. I will definitely re-listen to the entire episode myself and take notes very carefully. So again, thank you, and I'm sure our listeners will walk away with a lot of value. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Sam. To support this podcast, please leave a follow and share it with a friend. I hope to see you next time.